The big story of the week, of course, is the government's so-called mini-budget and the explosion of the doomsters and the gloomsters that were out to greet its announcement. Leading economists queued up to forecast disaster if Trussonomics gets the go-ahead, with even the IMF weighing in to tell us all about the inequality caused. But is this all just scaremongering to spook the markets? Some people might be making a bob or two out of it. What's the most radical shift in economic policy, certainly in my lifetime, could well be good for Britain? Is economic orthodoxy actually ultimately here to stay? Well, I'm delighted to say that with me in the studio is the Conservative peer, Lord Daniel Moylan. Now, Lord Moylan, I know that you, like I, were a big supporter of Boris Johnson.
Yes.
It strikes me that what we're seeing right now is a political and media class already clambering to get the scalp of another Tory Prime Minister.
And some of them, I'm afraid, include Conservative MPs. And I think it's part of a continuation of a campaign. There are people who want to talk Britain down, and they want to talk the government down. And some of them are, as you just said, doing that because they're in the market speculating against the pound and they want to make money out of it. But there are other people who want to do it because they feel that the country's taken a wrong turn since Brexit and they want to reverse it and take us back into the European Union. Mm-hmm. And they've turned out to be remarkably ruthless. I mean, when you and I campaigned for Brexit, we'd have accepted the vote. They've never accepted the vote. And they've turned out to be remarkably ruthless in doing this.
Absolutely. And it is across the piece, as you say, there are Conservative politicians who are even doing this, sort of clambering to keep this orthodoxy in place. But many of my viewers are saying, hang on a minute, the IMF warning of inequality in Britain, I'll be the judge of that at the next general election. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think the IMF overstepped the mark when it started getting involved in what are essentially political decisions about the distribution of resources and so forth in a member country. And they shouldn't have done that, and they should keep out of it. I think what we've learned over the last few years, we didn't know it before, is that computing power in the last 30 years has given people the idea that using models and algorithms, they can predict the future.
Yeah.
I think we should listen to experts on subjects which they are expert about. I no longer think we should listen to them when they're talking about what's going to happen in the future, except in very broad terms. The IMF is pretty useless, as you've pointed out, at forecasting what's going to happen economically in the future. The OBR, which, of course, everyone yesterday was clamouring, why didn't you consult the OBR? Well, one good reason is that their forecasts in the last 2 years have been so totally hopeless, you wouldn't ask them what the price of a bottle of milk was going to be tomorrow. They're so useless. And, of course, the biggest failure to forecast the future by these nerds, these geeks with models and computers and algorithms, was over COVID deaths, as we saw when Boris eventually had the gumption to say no to them. And he opened up the society again, remember the Christmas and so on, and said, and everything they'd predicted didn't actually happen because the Omicron variant turned out to be very, very weak. I mean, so they plug their numbers in. They don't even understand how the models work themselves, and they get garbage out the other end. We've got to be very cautious about listening to these forecasters. What we really need is a review of how dependent we've become on this garbage modelling.
And, you know, I'm going to say something that's going to have Twitter howling. There's a surprise. Which is that actually I think Liz Truss has been incredibly brave in what she's done and actually standing by the radical reforms. As I say, the most radical reforms that we've seen in the economy in my lifetime, where she's actually said, I'm not U-turning, actually. You know, that old Thatcher line of U-turn if you want to, the lady's not for turning. What do you think?
Well, I think she's absolutely right not to U-turn. I don't agree with you. These are, in themselves, the most radical reforms. It is a change in direction. And the change in direction is radical, that's true. But it's still only baby steps on the way in changing, you know, on that new route. Because what the government has actually done is, if you put the package together, you know, the biggest part of it was the support for energy, for households and businesses over energy. And then you've got cancelling 2 tax cuts that nobody wanted, like national insurance increase. You've got a penny off the income tax next April. I mean, a penny on, a penny off the income tax is sort of pretty sort of routine budget type work, isn't it? I mean, there's nothing very radical about it. And then you've got this thing everyone's angry about, which is the 45 pence tax rate.
Which costs 2 billion quid.
And probably won't cost anything.
No, because actually you'll have more people exactly
staying and not fiddling their tax.
And I wonder how many people coming from Scotland, actually, where, of course, it's 46p.
Yeah, well, there you are. So it's good moves in the right direction, but the reaction to it has been grossly over the top, and I think driven partly by speculators out to make a bob, more than a bob, millions, and partly by people who want to bring the government down. And that includes some of these. I mean, when you have all these IMF people and these foreign characters standing up on television with their doom and their gloom, they really have not got any more idea of what's going to happen over the next year or 2 years or 10 years to the economy than you or I have.
Yeah.
And that's almost the thing we need to look most closely into.
And
how we got trapped in
as
thinking
I said
we
at the
can tell
start
future.
there, we did. I mean, Mark Carney, he was howling into the wind.
Well, he's been howling because that's another interesting thing. You know, we used to have an understanding that inflation was linked to monetary policy. If you kept printing money, you would eventually get inflation. Actually, we've sort of known this since the 18th century when the French revolutionary government kept printing money and they had massive inflation. So we've known this, and that's why people have been very cautious about printing money over the last couple of hundred years. And then you've got this new generation in the last 20, 30 years of central bankers, of whom Mark Carney is a leading light. He's not the only one. Little club of international central bankers who decided monetary policy didn't matter. You could carry on printing money. Inflation wasn't the thing. Be green, be woke, and don't worry about inflation. It'll look after itself. And those of us who were saying, no, this is going to lead to inflation one day, these low interest rates, artificially low interest rates, are not actually helping the economy in the long run. They're keeping unproductive businesses in business and misallocating capital. And they will have to come right one day. And what they do, they led to huge increases in asset prices, house prices, distorted the economy, and you misprice capital, and you get consequences throughout the whole economy.
Well, listen, I'm sure I agree with all my viewers that'll be saying Lord Moylan for the next Bank of England governor. There we are, we've sorted it, fixed it.
I think they need one, and I'm happy to volunteer. I hadn't actually thought for myself as a natural.
Well, there we are. An exclusive here on this show. Lord Moylan, thank you very much for your time.